Ambassador Zethkari adjusted her crystalline collar as she watched the peculiar delegation approach through the grand viewing ports of Station Nexus Prime. The humans walked differently than other species, not the confident stride of the Vorthak Empire, not the flowing grace of the ethereal collective. Their leader, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes, carried herself with quiet dignity. Such small creatures, sneered General Thaxmore from behind his towering bulk. The Kronar warrior stood nearly 12 feet tall, his forearms crossed in obvious disdain. How did these humans even achieve spaceflight? Ambassador Zethkari studied the approaching group more carefully. Humans were indeed smaller than most galactic species, averaging around 6 feet in height. Their skin came in various shades of brown and pink, their hair in different colors and textures. They looked fragile compared to the armored chitinous bodies of the Zephi or the rock-like constitution of the Granite Lords. Perhaps we should not judge so quickly, suggested Dr. Yilmasa, the ethereal scientist whose translucent form shimmered with curious energy. Their technological achievements suggest intelligence, at least. The human delegation finally reached the central chamber, where representatives from 43 different species waited. The lead human woman stepped forward and bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that surprised many in the room. "Greetings, beings of the Galactic Council," she said, her translator converting her words into the common tongue. "I am Dr. Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Government. We are honored by your invitation to join this gathering of worlds." Counselor Prime Vextai, leader of the ancient Archon hegemony, studied the humans with his 6 eyes. His species had ruled the galaxy for over 10,000 years. And he found these newcomers amusing. "Welcome, humans. We have observed your recent expansion beyond your solar system with interest. Tell us, what do you bring to our ancient confederation?" Dr. Chen smiled, another peculiar human expression that seemed to involve showing teeth. "We bring knowledge, friendship, and a desire for peaceful coexistence. However, we also bring a warning that we hope you will take seriously." A ripple of confusion passed through the chamber. The massive behemoth delegates rumbled with what might have been laughter. The insectoid hive queens clicked their mandibles in apparent amusement. "A warning?" General Thaxmore's voice boomed across the chamber. "You dare threaten us?" "Not a threat," Dr. Chen said calmly, though something flickered in her eyes. "A warning. My people have a saying. Please don't anger us. It's advice we offer freely to all who would be our friends." The chamber erupted in various forms of alien laughter. The crystalline entities chimed musically. The gas form collective swirled in patterns that indicated mirth. And even the usually stoic stone speakers crackled with amusement. Counselor Prime Vextai raised one clawed hand for silence. "Humans, you are clearly new to galactic politics. Let me explain how things work here." He gestured broadly. "The Archon hegemony commands fleets that can glass entire star systems. The Vorthak Empire fields armies numbering in the trillions. The Kronar Confederacy possesses warriors who can tear apart starships with their bare claws. What exactly are we supposed to fear from you?" Dr. Chen's smile never wavered, but those who looked closely might have noticed her hands clasping tightly behind her back. "Counselor Prime, we don't ask you to fear us. We ask you to respect us as we respect you. And if respect isn't possible, we simply ask that you don't anger us. And what if we do?" The question came from War Empress Shalthus of the Vorthak Empire, her serpentine form coiled in obvious aggression. "What happens if we anger the mighty humans?" The human delegation exchanged glances. Dr. Chen looked down for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. When she looked up again, there was something in her expression that hadn't been there before, something that made a few of the more perceptive beings in the chamber pause. "War Empress," Dr. Chen said quietly. "I hope we never have to answer that question. For all our sakes, but the damage was done." Word of the human warning spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. Overnight, humans became a source of entertainment in alien social media networks. Comedy shows featured skits about the terrifying humans, with their "please don't anger us" warnings. Even children's educational programs used humans as examples of cute but delusional species. In the weeks that followed, human diplomatic missions were met with barely concealed mockery. When human traders arrived at major commercial hubs, they were often assigned the worst docking bays and charged excessive fees. Human scientific expeditions found their research requests delayed or denied entirely. Dr. Chen and her team remained professional throughout it all. They established Earth's first embassy on Station Nexus Prime, a modest facility that seemed tiny compared to the massive structures of other species. They continued their diplomatic efforts, always polite, always patient, always repeating their simple warning when tensions arose. The first real test came when human colony ships began moving toward the Kepler system, a region that the Kronar Confederacy claimed as their exclusive expansion zone. General Thaxmore himself arrived at the human embassy, his 4 massive arms clanking with ceremonial weapons. "Dr. Chen," he rumbled, towering over the human ambassador in her small office. "Your ships will withdraw from Kronar space immediately." Dr. Chen looked up from her desk calmly. "General, our surveys show the Kepler system contains 3 uninhabited planets suitable for human colonization. We've detected no Kronar presence there, and galactic law supports the settlement of unclaimed worlds. All space beyond the Kepler Nebula belongs to the Kronar." Thaxmore slammed one massive fist on her desk, causing coffee to spill from her cup. "Withdraw or face the consequences." Dr. Chen stood slowly, reaching for a cloth to clean up the spilled coffee. "General, I need to remind you of something. Please don't anger us." Thaxmore's laugh shook the windows of the embassy. "Anger you? Little human. I could crush your entire species with one arm tied behind my back. I really hope you don't try that, General," Dr. Chen said, still calmly wiping her desk. "For your sake more than ours." The confrontation was broadcast across the galaxy. Alien news networks played the footage on repeat, focusing on the moment when the massive Kronar general laughed at the tiny human ambassador. The video became a viral sensation, spawning millions of memes and parodies. The situation escalated when Kronar warships moved to intercept the human colony vessels. The contrast was stark: 3 small human transport ships, each carrying 10,000 sleeping colonists, faced off against a Kronar battle fleet of 50 warships, each the size of a small city. Captain Maria Santos commanded the human flagship, New Horizon. As Kronar vessels surrounded her small convoy, she opened communications with the enemy fleet. "Kronar vessels, this is Captain Santos. You are interfering with lawful colonization under Galactic Charter 97. Please withdraw." The response came from War Chief Groktal aboard the massive dreadnought Bone Crusher. His scarred face filled the view screen, tusks gleaming with metallic implants. "Human insects, turn around now, or we will demonstrate why the galaxy fears Kronar might." Captain Santos was quiet for a long moment. Her bridge crew, 20 humans, operating a ship that alien species would need hundreds to crew, waited for her orders. Finally, she spoke again. "War Chief Groktal, I'm going to give you the same warning my ambassador gave your general. Please don't anger us." The laughter that erupted from the Kronar bridge was so loud it distorted the communication channel. Other Kronar ships joined in, their massive crews howling with amusement. The moment was broadcast live across the galaxy, and within hours, alien betting pools opened on how quickly the humans would surrender. "You are either very brave or very stupid, little human," Groktal finally said, wiping tears from his eyes. "I think stupid. You have 1 hour to turn around, or we will show you what happens to insects who don't know their place." Captain Santos nodded slowly. "War Chief, you've been warned. What happens next is your choice, not ours." The human ships continued on their course. Kronar vessels moved to intercept, weapons powering up in displays visible even to the naked eye. The entire galaxy watched as the tiny human convoy maintained course toward what seemed like certain destruction. On Station Nexus Prime, alien diplomats gathered in the observation lounges to watch what they assumed would be a brief but entertaining demonstration of human foolishness. Ambassador Zethkari found herself standing next to Dr. Chen, who watched the unfolding events with an expression of profound sadness. "Dr. Chen," Zethkari said quietly, Surely you don't expect 3 transport ships to defeat a Kronar battle fleet. And Dr. Chen turned to her with tired eyes. Ambassador, I expect the Kronar to make a choice. I hope they make the right one. And if they don't? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long time, watching as the two forces drew closer together on the tactical display. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Then they'll learn why we warned them. The first Kronar shots lit up space like deadly fireworks. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids fired in perfect synchronization, their beams converging on the lead human transport ship. The alien observers held their breath, waiting to see the human vessel vaporized. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ship didn't even slow down. The plasma beams that should have reduced it to molecular dust simply dispersed around it, as if the vessel existed in a different dimension. What? Ambassador Zethkari stared at the display in shock. How is that possible? Dr. Chen's reflection in the observation window looked older than it had moments before. Because, she said quietly, you never asked what we were warning you about. The Kronar fleet fired again, this time with everything they had. Missiles, energy weapons, gravitational disruptors, quantum torpedoes, enough firepower to sterilize a planet. All of it simply vanished as it approached the human vessels, as if reality itself bent around them. Captain Santos opened communications again. Her voice was calm, professional, and somehow more terrifying than any alien war cry. War Chief Groktal, you've made your choice. Now you'll see ours. Please note that you fired first, and we warned you repeatedly. What comes next is not our fault. The lead human transport ship, still moving at a steady pace toward the Kepler system, began to change. Its simple, utilitarian hull started to unfold like an origami sculpture, revealing geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. The transformation was beautiful and terrible at the same time, like watching a butterfly emerge from its chrysalis, if butterflies were made of crystallized physics and folded space-time. By the ancient codes, whispered Dr. Yilmasa, her ethereal form flickering with shock. What are they? The answer came not from Dr. Chen, but from the transformed human vessel itself. As it completed its metamorphosis, it became clear that it had never been a simple transport ship. It was something far more complex, something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space allowed. War Chief Groktal, aboard his massive dreadnought, stared at his instruments in confusion. Weapons! Fire again! Destroy that abomination! But his crew was already backing away from their control stations. The ship's sensors were showing readings that made no sense, energy signatures that shouldn't exist, gravitational anomalies that defied physics, temporal distortions that made their navigation computers scream error messages. War Chief, his science officer said in a trembling voice, our computers can't even classify what that thing is. It's like reality breaks down around it. The transformed human vessel began to move differently, no longer following simple Newtonian physics. It flickered in and out of visible space, sometimes appearing behind Kronar ships, sometimes above them, sometimes in several places at once. Each time it reappeared, another Kronar vessel simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, not vaporized, just gone, as if it had never been built. All ships retreat, Groktal screamed into his communicator. Full retreat. Maximum burn. But retreat was already impossible. The space around them had become something else. A maze of twisted dimensions where the normal rules no longer applied. Kronar warships that tried to jump to faster than light speeds found themselves emerging from hyperspace in the same location they'd started, trapped in some kind of spatial loop. One by one, the greatest battle fleet in Kronar history ceased to exist. Not through violence, not through destruction, but through something far more fundamental. They were simply edited out of reality by forces that operated on levels beyond conventional understanding. Within 10 minutes, 50 of the most powerful warships ever built by one of the galaxy's most feared military powers were gone. Only War Chief Groktal's flagship remained, held in place by invisible forces, while its crew stared in shock at empty space where their fleet had been. Captain Santos opened communications one last time. Her image appeared on Groktal's screen, and she looked exactly as she had before, calm, professional, and deeply sad. "War Chief," she said gently. "You and your crew are the only survivors, because someone needs to carry this message back to your people. Humanity doesn't want war. We don't want conquest. We don't want to rule anyone or control anything. We just want to be left in peace, to live our lives, and build our homes. But if you force us to defend ourselves," she gestured toward the empty space where the Kronar fleet had been, "please tell your people what you've seen here today. Tell them we warned you. Tell them we asked you, very politely, not to anger us. And tell them that next time, we might not leave any survivors to carry the message." The human ships, now appearing as simple transports again, as if their transformation had been a shared hallucination, continued on their way toward the Kepler system. War Chief Groktal's dreadnought was released from whatever force had held it, left alone in empty space with a crew that would never again doubt the power of small, polite warnings. The recording of the incident spread across the galaxy faster than news of the original confrontation had. This time, however, nobody was laughing. The impossible destruction of an entire Kronar battle fleet by 3 human transport ships sparked panic, confusion, and a desperate scramble to understand what humanity really was. On Station Nexus Prime, the observation lounge was completely silent. Dozens of alien diplomats stared at the tactical display, showing empty space where the Kronar fleet had been. Ambassador Zethkari turned to Dr. Chen with wide, frightened eyes. "Dr. Chen," she whispered, "what are you? What are humans?" Dr. Chen looked older than ever, her shoulders heavy with an invisible burden. "We're exactly what we told you we were, Ambassador. We're people who want to live in peace, people who prefer diplomacy to violence, people who would rather build than destroy. But that," Zethkari gestured toward the display, "that wasn't natural. That wasn't possible." "No, Doctor," Chen agreed sadly. "It wasn't. But you wouldn't listen to our warnings. You wouldn't respect our requests for peace. You forced us to show you why we asked you not to anger us." The chamber erupted into chaos, as alien diplomats frantically tried to contact their home governments. Some species immediately began preparing defensive measures. Others started drafting formal apologies to Earth, and a few began calculating how quickly they could surrender if necessary. Dr. Chen stood quietly in the middle of it all, watching through the viewport as the human colony ships continued toward their destination. In a few hours, 10,000 humans would wake up from their sleeping pods to begin building a new home on a world that was now unquestionably theirs. "Please don't anger us," she repeated quietly to herself. Such a simple request. But she knew that the galaxy's reaction to this incident would determine whether humanity could live in peace, or whether they would be forced to demonstrate again why their quiet warnings should never be ignored. The age of innocence was over. Now the galaxy would have to decide how it wanted to proceed with species that looked harmless, spoke politely, and could casually edit entire fleets out of existence when pushed too far. The humans had kept their word. They had warned everyone. The question now was whether anyone would be wise enough to listen. 3 months after the Kepler incident, as historians would later call it, the galaxy had divided into 3 distinct factions. The first group, led by Ambassador Zethkari's people, immediately sought peaceful relations with humanity. The second group, consisting of various smaller species, went into hiding or tried to remain completely neutral. The third group, however, refused to accept what they had witnessed. Emperor Vaxthul of the Vorthak Empire stood in his throne room, his serpentine form coiled around a pillar of crystallized pain, a material that existed only in the deepest torture chambers of his realm. His scaled hide rippled with barely contained fury as he watched the recorded footage of the Kronar fleet's disappearance for the 1,000th time. "Impossible," he hissed to his assembled war council. "No species possesses such technology. It's a trick, an illusion, some kind of advanced holographic deception." High Admiral Yusthara, her own scales gleaming with battle scars, nodded in agreement. The humans must have discovered some ancient alien artifact. They're using technology they don't understand, probably stolen from a long-dead civilization. Exactly. The Emperor's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the fear in the room. Which means they're vulnerable. If we can determine how their stolen technology works, we can defeat it. And then, his eyes glowed with malevolent anticipation, we can take it for ourselves. Quote, the plan they hatched was comprehensive and brutal. Rather than direct military confrontation, they would probe human defenses systematically. Vorthak infiltrators would sabotage human colonies. Pirate fleets funded by the Empire would attack human trade routes. Most importantly, they would capture human civilians for interrogation and experimentation. The first attacks began subtly. Human cargo vessels started disappearing in the Outer Rim territories. Distress calls were answered only by empty space. Colony communication arrays suffered mysterious failures. When human security forces investigated, they found no evidence of foul play, just missing people and damaged equipment. Dr. Chen sat in her office on Station Nexus Prime, reviewing intelligence reports with growing concern. Her aide, Lieutenant Commander Jackson Hayes, a former military officer turned diplomat, spread holographic displays across her desk. 17 missing ships in the past month, he reported grimly. 43 colonists vanished from New Geneva Colony. 12 separate incidents of sabotage across 6 different systems. The pattern is clear, we're under attack. Dr. Chen studied the data carefully. Have we identified the perpetrators? Officially? No. But the weapon signatures and ship designs suggest Vorthak involvement. They're being careful not to leave direct evidence, but their fingerprints are all over this. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 70 years. How are our people responding to the attacks? Lieutenant Commander Hayes hesitated. That's the problem, Ambassador. Our military commanders are requesting permission to retaliate. But our civilian leadership is divided. Some want to lodge formal complaints through the Galactic Council. Others are suggesting we withdraw from contested territories entirely. And what do our people who are actually being attacked want? They want protection. They want us to stop the disappearances. They want. Hayes paused, choosing his words carefully. They want us to show the galaxy again why we warned them. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long time, staring out her window at the busy traffic around Station Nexus Prime. Ships from dozens of species moved in carefully choreographed patterns, conducting the business of galactic civilization. It looked peaceful, orderly, civilized. She knew better. Lieutenant Commander, send a message to Emperor Vax's Thule. Request an immediate audience to discuss recent incidents in Vorthak space. Axis. Ma'am, the Emperor hasn't responded to any diplomatic overtures since the Kepler incident. Intelligence suggests he's actively planning something against us. Dr. Chen turned back to him with an expression he'd never seen before. For just a moment, the kindly grandmother diplomat was gone, replaced by something that made his trained soldier instincts scream warnings. Then we'll deliver our message in person, she said quietly, and we'll remind him one more time why he shouldn't anger us. The human diplomatic vessel, Olive Branch, arrived at Vorthak Prime 3 days later. It was the smallest ship in the massive fleet surrounding the capital world. A simple courier vessel carrying only Dr. Chen, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, and a crew of 6. The Vorthak defense fleet consisted of over 3,000 warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything the Kronar had possessed. Emperor Vax Thule received news of the human arrival with savage glee. Perfect. They've delivered themselves directly to us. He turned to High Admiral Ysethra. Capture their ship. I want every human aboard taken alive for interrogation. The Vorthak fleet moved to surround the tiny human vessel, like wolves circling a wounded deer. Tractor beams locked onto the Olive Branch, while boarding pods launched from dozens of different ships. The Emperor himself watched from his flagship as what appeared to be the easiest capture in military history unfolded. Dr. Chen stood on the bridge of her small ship, watching the approaching Vorthak forces with the same calm expression she'd worn during every diplomatic crisis of her long career. Lieutenant Commander Hayes checked his weapon one final time, a simple sidearm that would be useless against hundreds of Vorthak boarders. Ambassador, he said quietly, my oath is to protect you, but I'm not sure how much help I'll be against 3,000 warships. Dr. Chen smiled sadly. Lieutenant Commander, you've served with honor, but this isn't your fight anymore. The first Vorthak boarding pod struck the human ship's hull with metallic clangs that echoed through the corridors. Plasma cutters began burning through the outer hatches, while the boarding parties prepared to storm the vessel. Inside their pods, Vorthak warriors wearing powered armor checked their weapons and activated their combat drugs. They were expecting to face desperate humans armed with primitive kinetic weapons. Instead, they found empty corridors. Where are they? Snarled boarding commander Thesrix as his troops swept through the seemingly abandoned ship. Thermal scanners show life signs, but we can't locate them. The answer came from the ship's communication system. Dr. Chen's voice echoed through every corridor, calm and professional as always. Vorthak warriors, you are currently aboard a human diplomatic vessel conducting a peaceful mission. Your actions constitute an act of war under galactic law. I am going to give you one final warning. Please don't anger us. Commander Thesrix laughed, his translator converting the sound into a series of threatening hisses. Human female, show yourself and surrender. The mighty Vorthak Empire will dissect your secrets from your living brain. The response was not what he expected. Instead of fear or defiance, Dr. Chen's voice carried only profound sadness. Commander, you've been warned. What happens next is your choice, not ours. The human ship began to change. Like the transports at Kepler, it started unfolding in ways that defied conventional geometry. The Vorthak boarding parties found themselves in corridors that were somehow longer on the inside than the outside, in rooms where the walls curved in directions that didn't exist, in spaces where gravity worked differently in each corner. Fall back, Commander Thesrix screamed into his communicator. Something's wrong. The ship is... His transmission cut off as reality around him folded into shapes that mortal minds couldn't process. One by one, the boarding parties simply vanished, edited out of existence by forces that operated beyond conventional physics. Emperor Vaxthul watched from his flagship as his boarding pods fell silent. What's happening? Report. My lord, his sensor operator's voice cracked with strain. The human ship is changing. Our instruments can't properly scan it anymore. And our boarding parties, they're gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? I mean they no longer exist, my lord. Not destroyed, not killed, just removed from reality. The Emperor's rage was magnificent to behold. His serpentine form thrashed with such fury that it cracked the crystal floor of his bridge. All ships! Open fire! Destroy that abomination. 3,000 Vorthak warships opened fire simultaneously. The combined firepower was enough to turn a small moon into vapor. Quantum disruptors, dark matter cannons, singularity torpedoes, and weapons that existed only in the deepest vaults of the Empire's arsenal. All of it focused on one small human vessel. None of it reached its target. The weapon's fire simply vanished as it approached the olive branch, as if space itself had decided that violence wasn't permitted in that location. Energy beams bent around the human ship like light around a black hole. Missiles disappeared into dimensional folds. Even the most exotic weapons seemed to forget they had ever been fired. Dr. Chen opened communications with the Vorthak fleet. Her image appeared on every screen in every ship, and her voice carried to every warrior in the massive armada. Emperor Vaxthul, she said, looking directly at him across impossible distances. You have attacked a diplomatic vessel. You have attempted to capture and torture peaceful emissaries. You have violated every treaty and convention that holds galactic civilization together. Most importantly, you have chosen to anger us after we specifically warned you not to. The Emperor snarled back at her image. Human witch! What manner of sorcery is this? What dark powers do you serve? We serve only ourselves, Doctor, Chen replied sadly. We are what we told you we were, people who want to live in peace. But you wouldn't listen to our warnings. You wouldn't respect our simple requests. You forced us to show you what we really are. The human ship's transformation accelerated. It became something that hurt to look at directly. A structure that existed in too many dimensions at once. Reality around it began to ripple like water, and the Vorthak fleet found themselves trapped in an ocean of liquid space-time. "What are you?" the Emperor whispered, his rage finally giving way to terror. Dr. Chen's expression was infinitely sad. "We're the species that destroyed our own planet's ecosystem through carelessness, then learned to rebuild reality itself rather than die. We're the people who fought wars so terrible that we broke the fundamental forces of physics, then had to learn to repair the universe by hand. We're the children who played with fire until we burned down everything we loved, then became fire itself to survive." As she spoke, the Vorthak fleet began to experience impossible things. Ships found their weapons turning into flowering plants. Armor plating transformed into musical instruments that played hauntingly beautiful melodies. Warriors discovered their battle drugs had become love potions, filling them with overwhelming affection for their enemies. "We are humanity," Dr. Chen continued, her voice echoing across dimensions that shouldn't exist. "We are the species that learned to rewrite the rules of existence because we broke them so thoroughly that nothing else would work. We are the universe's immune system, developed in response to our own toxicity." Emperor Vaxthal's flagship began to change. Its weapons transformed into art galleries. Its engine room became a library filled with poetry from 1,000 worlds. His torture chambers turned into gardens where impossible flowers bloomed with the light of distant stars. "We don't want to rule you," Dr. Chen said gently. "We don't want to conquer you or control you or harm you in any way. We just want you to live good lives and be happy. But if you force us to defend ourselves, we will reshape reality itself to make sure we survive." And that reshaping tends to be rather dramatic. The Emperor found himself standing in what had once been his throne room, now transformed into a peaceful meadow, where the crystallized pain had become singing crystal that filled the air with music that healed old wounds. His advisors wandered around in confused wonder. Their weapons turned to instruments of art and creation. "Please, Doctor," Chen's voice was barely a whisper now. "Don't make us do this again. We really, truly don't want to hurt anyone. We just want to be left in peace to build our homes and raise our children and create beautiful things." "Is that so much to ask?" The transformation spread beyond the fleet, beyond the star system, beyond the Empire itself. Across Vorthak space, weapons became musical instruments. Torture devices became healing chambers. Slave markets became schools and hospitals. The entire military-industrial complex of the most brutal empire in the galaxy was, gently, irresistibly converted into a force for creation and healing. But the beings themselves were unchanged. Vorthak warriors still had their minds, their memories, their personalities intact. They could still choose to be violent or peaceful, cruel or kind. They simply no longer had the tools for large-scale destruction. In his meadow throne room, Emperor Vaxthul collapsed to his knees among the singing flowers. For the first time in his 1,000-year reign, he wept not from pain or rage, but from the sudden, overwhelming understanding of what he had lost by choosing hatred over love. "We're sorry," he whispered to the air. "We're so sorry. We didn't know. We didn't understand. How we really tender. How we really tender farm. 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 How we really tender farm." Dr. Chen's voice came one last time, infinitely gentle and infinitely sad. "Now you do. Please remember this lesson. Please teach your people to choose differently, and please, for all our sakes, don't anger us again." The human ship returned to its simple, unassuming form and continued on its diplomatic mission as if nothing had happened. But across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The mighty Vorthak Empire, the most feared military power in known space, had been transformed overnight into something resembling a utopian society. The missing human civilians were returned unharmed, along with formal apologies from their captors. The pirate attacks stopped immediately. The sabotage ceased. Suddenly, every species in the galaxy wanted to ensure that their policies toward humanity were extremely, clearly, definitively peaceful. On Station Nexus Prime, Ambassador Zethkari met with Dr. Chen in the human embassy. The crystalline being's usually confident demeanor was replaced by something approaching awe. "Dr. Chen," she said carefully, "my people have been analyzing the data from both the Kepler incident and what happened to the Vorthak Empire. Our scientists are confused." Dr. Chen poured tea for both of them. A simple human ritual that somehow seemed profound in light of recent events. "What kind of confusion, Ambassador?" "The energy requirements alone for what you did should have been impossible. To reshape matter on such a scale, to alter the fundamental properties of an entire star system." Zethkari paused, choosing her words carefully. "Our best theories suggest you would need to harness the power output of an entire galaxy." Dr. Chen sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Ambassador, what if I told you that humans don't use energy the way other species do?" "What do you mean?" "What if I told you that we learn to reshape reality not by forcing it to change, but by asking it politely? What if the universe itself wants to help us because it remembers what we were like before we learned to be better?" Zethkari's crystalline form flickered with confusion. I don't understand." Dr. Chen smiled sadly. "Neither do we. Completely. We just know that when we really, truly need something to be different, and when we ask in the right way, reality tends to cooperate. The universe seems to like it when we choose creation over destruction, healing over harm, love over hate. But the power involved isn't power at all," Dr. Chen finished. "It's permission. The universe gives us permission to fix things when we prove we're trying to fix them, rather than break them." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping tea and watching the traffic outside the embassy windows. Finally, Zethkari spoke again. "Dr. Chen, my people want to offer humanity full membership in our confederation. We also want to establish cultural exchange programs, scientific collaboration treaties, and," she paused, "we want to learn how to ask the universe for permission instead of trying to force it to obey." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "We'd be honored to share what we've learned. But Ambassador, I need you to understand something important." "Yes?" "What we did to the Kronar fleet and the Vorthak Empire. Those were small demonstrations. Gentle reminders. If someone really, truly angers us, if they threaten our children, if they try to commit genocide, if they attempt to destroy entire planets." She set down her teacup with hands that trembled slightly. "If they make us genuinely angry instead of just mildly annoyed." "Yes?" Dr. Chen looked out the window at the peaceful traffic patterns, at the ships from dozens of species conducting business in harmony. "Then you'll discover that reshaping a single star system is what we do when we're being polite." The galaxy was learning, slowly and carefully, that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their mysterious abilities. It was their infinite capacity for patience, kindness, and restraint. They could reshape reality itself, but they chose to use that power only when forced to defend themselves. The question now was whether the rest of the galaxy could learn to live peacefully with beings who asked nicely before performing miracles, and who gave warnings before ending civilizations. Most species were eager to learn that lesson. A few, however, still didn't understand what they were dealing with, and humanity's patience, while vast, was not unlimited. The message arrived at human embassy stations across the galaxy simultaneously, carried by quantum entanglement communicators that bypassed normal space entirely. Dr. Chen was having breakfast with her granddaughter, who had come to visit during her college break, when Lieutenant Commander Hayes burst into her quarters without announcement. "Ambassador," he said, his face pale with shock. "We've received a priority alpha message from the Sanctuary Fleet." Dr. Chen set down her coffee cup carefully. The Sanctuary Fleet was humanity's most classified operation, a group of ships that didn't officially exist, carrying civilians and children to places so remote that no other species even knew they were habitable. "What's the situation, Lieutenant Commander?" "The Devourer Collective has found New Eden Colony." The words hit Dr. Chen like a physical blow. New Eden was home to 30 million human children, refugees from Earth's environmental disasters, orphans from the early space colonization attempts, and the offspring of the first human settlements. It was supposed to be impossible to locate, hidden in a region of space that existed between dimensions. Her granddaughter, Sarah, looked between them with growing concern. "Grandmother, what's the Devourer Collective?" Dr. Chen took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. The Devourer Collective was the galaxy's nightmare. A species that consumed other intelligent beings not for nutrition, but for the psychic energy released during terror and agony. They were the one species that every other civilization had agreed to fight, regardless of their own conflicts. "They're monsters, dear," Dr. Chen said quietly. "The kind that used to hide under children's beds. Except they're real, and they eat entire worlds." Lieutenant Commander Hayes activated his secure communicator. "Ma'am, the collective has already begun their assault. New Eden's defenses are holding, but..." He paused, reviewing the data streaming in. "Admiral Morrison estimates maybe 6 hours before the barriers fail. What about evacuation? Impossible. The collective has space-time locked around the entire system. Nothing can get in or out until they're finished feeding." Dr. Chen stood slowly, her breakfast forgotten. For 70 years, she had served as humanity's face to the galaxy. She had negotiated peace treaties, resolved conflicts, and always maintained her composure. She had warned species to not anger humanity, while never losing her gentle smile. That smile was gone now. "Lieutenant Commander, send a message to every human ship, every human colony, every human citizen in the galaxy. Tell them what's happening. Tell them the Devourers have our children." "Ma'am, should I also notify the Galactic Council? Request assistance?" Dr. Chen looked out her window at Station Nexus Prime, at the thousands of alien ships conducting peaceful business in blissful ignorance of what was about to happen. "No," she said quietly. "This is no longer a diplomatic matter. Send word to Admiral Chen." Lieutenant Commander Hayes hesitated. "Ma'am, Admiral Chen is your son. And he's commanding the Ghost Fleet. I know exactly who he is and what he commands. Send the message." The Ghost Fleet was humanity's deepest secret. Darker even than the Sanctuary Fleet. It consisted of ships that technically didn't exist, crewed by humans who had officially died, using technology that shouldn't be possible even by human standards. They were the ones humanity sent when politeness wasn't enough, when warnings had been ignored, when someone needed to learn what human anger really looked like. Sarah looked at her grandmother with growing alarm. "Grandmother, you're scaring me. I've never seen you like this." Dr. Chen turned to her granddaughter, and for a moment, Sarah saw something in those kind eyes that made her step backward. It was like looking into the heart of a star, beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely lethal. "Sarah, dear, call your parents. Tell them to go to emergency station 7 immediately. Don't pack, don't delay. Just go. Take everyone you love and get as far away from galactic civilization as possible." "But why? What's going to happen?" Dr. Chen's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that seemed to crush the air around them. "The galaxy is about to discover what happens when humans stop being polite." The first sign that something had changed came 6 hours later, when the Devourer Collective's feeding ships at New Eden simply stopped transmitting. The massive bio-vessels, each one the size of a small planet, had been broadcasting their victims' screams across subspace as a form of psychological warfare. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the screams had been. On Collective Prime, the hive mind that controlled the species felt the first flicker of something it had never experienced before. Concern. The ships at New Eden weren't responding to commands. They weren't being destroyed. Destruction would have registered on the psychic network. They were just gone. The hive mind sent out exploration tendrils, psychic probes that could traverse the galaxy in seconds. What they found at New Eden defied understanding. The star system was still there. The planet was intact. The human children were alive and unharmed, but the Devourer ships existed only as empty shells. Their crews vanished as if they had never been born. Standing on the surface of New Eden, surrounded by 30 million human children who had been pulled back from the brink of the most horrible death imaginable, stood a single human figure. Admiral David Chen wore a simple black uniform with no rank insignia, no decorations, no identification. He looked like a perfectly ordinary middle-aged man, except for his eyes. His eyes contained the accumulated grief and rage of an entire species that had spent centuries learning to be better than their worst impulses. They held the sorrow of a people who had destroyed their own world through carelessness. The determination of survivors who had sworn never to let evil triumph again. And the terrible, infinite love of parents who would do absolutely anything to protect their children. Admiral Chen opened a communication channel that somehow reached every corner of the galaxy simultaneously, cutting across every frequency, bypassing every security system, speaking directly into the minds of every sentient being in known space. "This is Admiral David Chen of the Human Ghost Fleet," he said in a voice that was calm, professional, and more frightening than any battle cry ever uttered. "The Devourer Collective has attacked our children. They have chosen to cross the one line we will never allow anyone to cross. They have mistaken our mercy for weakness and our warnings for emptiness." On Station Nexus Prime, Ambassador Zethkari watched in horror as every single Devourer ship in the galaxy, thousands of massive biovessels scattered across hundreds of star systems, simply stopped moving. Their crews were still alive, still conscious, but they found themselves unable to control their own bodies. "Today," Admiral Chen continued, "the galaxy will learn the difference between annoying humanity and making us genuinely angry. You've seen what we do when we're mildly irritated. Now you'll see what we do when someone hurts our children." The Devourer Collective's hive mind reached out with all its psychic power, trying to reassert control over its vast fleet. Instead, it found itself face to face with something that shouldn't exist, a human consciousness that had grown beyond individual awareness and merged with the fundamental forces of reality itself. Admiral Chen stood alone on New Eden, but he was no longer just one person. He was connected to every human who had ever lived, every human who would ever be born, and every human who existed in any possible timeline. He was the collective will of a species that had learned to reshape the universe itself through the simple act of caring more about others than about themselves. "Devourer Collective," he said, and his voice now carried the weight of entire galaxies. "You have fed on the suffering of innocence for millennia. You have turned pain into pleasure and made art from agony. You have committed crimes so vast that even the universe itself has grown tired of your existence." The hive mind tried to speak, tried to defend itself, tried to explain that this was simply their nature. But it found that reality no longer allowed such explanations. The universe had decided that some actions were simply unacceptable, and the accumulated weight of human moral authority had given it permission to act. "We offered you the same thing we offered everyone else," Admiral Chen continued, his form beginning to change as he spoke. "We asked you politely to leave us alone. We warned you not to anger us. We gave you every possible chance to choose a different path." The Admiral was no longer entirely human in appearance. He had become something larger, something that existed partially outside normal space and time. Around him, the children of New Eden watched in awed silence as their protector transformed into something that was still recognizably their species, but elevated to a level that made him equal to forces of nature. "But you chose to hunt our children. You chose to feed on the terror of innocence. You chose to make our babies scream for your entertainment." Across the galaxy, every Devourer ship began to change. Not destroyed, not converted like the Vorthak weapons had been, but transformed into something that served life instead of consuming it. Their feeding chambers became nurseries. Their torture implements became toys and educational tools. Their crews found themselves compelled to care for and protect any children they encountered, unable to feel anything but love and protective instincts when faced with young life. "So now," Admiral Chen said, his voice echoing across dimensions, "you will spend the rest of eternity protecting the very children you once hunted. You will know the joy of seeing innocence smile instead of scream. You will feel the satisfaction of building instead of destroying. And every time you think about returning to your old ways, you will remember this moment and choose differently." The transformation was absolute and irreversible. The most feared predators in galactic history became the most dedicated protectors of young life. Their psychic abilities, once used to amplify suffering, now detected any threat to children from across vast distances. Their massive bioships became mobile sanctuaries where orphaned or endangered young could find safety. But the changes didn't stop with the Devourer Collective. Throughout the galaxy, every species that had ever preyed on the innocent found themselves gently but irresistibly compelled to become protectors instead. Slave traders discovered that their ships would only carry refugees to safety. Pirates found their weapons transformed into tools for building schools and hospitals. Warlords became teachers. Tyrants became healers. And those who had profited from suffering found themselves dedicating their lives to ending it. The universe itself seemed to sigh with relief, as countless cycles of violence and exploitation came to a sudden, permanent end. On Station Nexus Prime, Dr. Chen felt the transformation complete itself, and knew that her son had finished his work. She also knew that what he had done was beyond anything humanity had ever attempted before, not just reshaping matter or energy, but rewriting the moral foundations of reality itself. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stared at his instruments in shock. "Ambassador, we're receiving surrender messages from everyone. Every hostile fleet, every criminal organization, every species that's ever threatened anyone. They're all surrendering unconditionally and requesting permission to serve humanity in whatever way we deem appropriate." Dr. Chen nodded tiredly. "Send them our standard response. We don't want servants or subjects. We want partners in building a better galaxy. Tell them they can serve best by being kind to each other and protecting those who can't protect themselves." Ambassador Zethkari appeared on the communication screen, her crystalline form flickering with emotions too complex to translate. "Dr. Chen, what has your species done?" "The entire galactic political structure has changed in the space of 6 hours. Every major threat to civilized life has simply stopped being a threat." "Ambassador," Dr. Chen said gently, "we did what we always do when someone hurts our children. We made sure it could never happen again. But the scale of it. You've changed the fundamental nature of aggression itself. You've made it impossible for any species to truly harm another." Dr. Chen smiled sadly. "Not impossible, Ambassador. We've simply made it so that anyone who chooses harm over help will find themselves compelled to experience the joy of helping instead. Free will is still intact. It's just harder to choose cruelty when kindness feels so much better. And the cost? What did this transformation cost humanity?" Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the galaxy that was already beginning to reshape itself around its new moral foundations. Ships that had been designed for war were being converted to exploration vessels. Resources once spent on weapons were being redirected to hospitals and schools. Children across 1,000 worlds were sleeping safely for the first time in their lives. "It cost us our son," she said finally. "Admiral Chen gave himself completely to make this possible. He's still alive, but he's no longer entirely human. He's become something larger, something that exists to maintain what he created. We'll never see him again, not as he was." The weight of that sacrifice settled over the communication channel like a shroud. Zethkari understood now why Dr. Chen had looked so tired, so aged. Humanity had saved the galaxy by giving up one of their own to become its eternal guardian. "Dr. Chen," Zethkari said softly, "why? Why sacrifice so much for species that mostly ignored your warnings and mocked your attempts at peace?" Dr. Chen's smile was infinitely sad and infinitely kind. "Because, Ambassador, that's what parents do. They protect their children, even when those children are foolish or ungrateful. And in the end, every sentient being in this galaxy is our child now. Our responsibility. Our family. What happens now?" "Now, Doctor?" Chen poured herself a cup of tea with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion. "Now we build the galaxy we always said we wanted. A place where children can grow up safe, where different species can cooperate instead of compete, where problems are solved through understanding rather than force. And if someone finds a way around the changes your son made, if someone develops new ways to cause suffering," Dr. Chen's eyes held depths that contained both infinite compassion and implacable determination. "Then they'll discover that Admiral Chen wasn't the only human willing to make that sacrifice. We have 30 billion people who would gladly give up their individual existence to protect the innocent. And we have technologies and abilities you haven't seen yet, held in reserve for emergencies we hope will never come. You're saying humanity could do this again? On an even larger scale? Ambassador, Dr. Chen said gently. What you've seen so far is what we do when we're trying to be proportional and restrained. If someone ever threatens to destroy the galaxy itself, or if some new form of ultimate evil emerges, you'll discover that reshaping the moral foundations of reality was our polite response. The communication ended, leaving Zethkari alone with the stunning realization that humanity's greatest demonstrations of power had been acts of mercy, not strength. They could have simply destroyed every threat they faced. But instead, they had chosen to heal the galaxy's capacity for evil itself. On New Eden, 30 million human children played in gardens that had been feeding chambers just hours before. They were watched over by former devourers who now felt nothing but joy when they saw young lives flourish. The children didn't fully understand what had happened, but they knew they were safe now in a way they had never been before. Somewhere between dimensions, Admiral David Chen felt their happiness and knew that his sacrifice had been worthwhile. He could no longer hug his own children or share meals with his family, but he could ensure that every child in the galaxy would grow up knowing that someone loved them enough to protect them from any possible harm. And in her embassy on Station Nexus Prime, Dr. Chen raised her teacup in a quiet salute to her son and to the galaxy he had saved. The universe was kinder now, gentler, more loving. Evil hadn't been destroyed that would have violated free will, but it had been transformed into its opposite. The galaxy had finally learned why humans had warned them so persistently and politely not to anger them. It wasn't because humans were strong, though they were. It wasn't because they had advanced technology, though they did. It was because humanity's love for innocent life was so profound, so absolute, that when someone threatened their children, they would literally rewrite the laws of reality to ensure it could never happen again. And the most terrifying part, for any remaining potential threats, was the knowledge that this transformation of universal morality had been humanity's gentle response. What they did when they were still trying to be reasonable. The galaxy would be a better place now. Children would be safer. Cooperation would be easier. And the cycle of violence that had plagued civilization for millennia had finally been broken. But somewhere in the back of every species' collective consciousness was the quiet, persistent question: what would humans do if someone actually succeeded in making them truly, genuinely, unrestrainedly angry? It was a question that no one wanted to find the answer to, and that everyone hoped would never need to be asked. The age of human warnings was over. The age of human protection had begun, and the galaxy, despite everything it had lost in terms of old power structures and familiar conflicts, was grateful for the exchange.